Hello and welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. I'm your host, Lauren Zayu. Join me as we navigate the political communications, ups and downs, and ins and outs of our day. We're talking to leading experts on the issues that help our country move forward for the better. My guests and I promise to give you the history, the real, and the ideal. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. I'm your host, Lauren Zayu. Since the 2016 presidential election revealed some stark differences along racial lines in regards to voting, the rallying cry of listening to Black women has become prevalent across many areas of work. Today, we're in conversation with Gabrielle Wyatt, founder of the Highland Project, an organization focused on building and sustaining a pipeline of Black women leading communities, institutions, and systems, resulting in the creation of multi-generational wealth and change in their communities. Prior to founding the Highland Project, Gabrielle led major change initiatives in our nation's largest and most complex school systems, and shaped the investment strategy of leading national philanthropic initiatives. Most recently, she was a partner at the City Fund, founded by leading national philanthropists to support local education leaders to build local movements for systemic change in education. Gabrielle supported local education leaders across the nation to expand opportunities for students in public schools through strategic advising, board service, and philanthropic investments. During her tenure, Wyatt launched the City Leadership Fellowship, an executive leadership development program focused on empowering Black and Latinx leaders pursuing bold education visions. Before joining the City Fund, Gabrielle was the Chief Strategy Officer at Civic Builders, a nonprofit focused on solving the facilities challenge for high-quality charter schools. Gabrielle led partnerships with the Walton Family Foundation and Laura and John Arnold Foundation to launch 3 national facilities funds to support growing, high-performing public schools. As a Baltimore native, Gabrielle began her career as a Baltimore County Public Schools Board of Education member. Gabrielle is a graduate of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the Harvard Kennedy Public School. Gabrielle Wyatt is the proud daughter of 2 Baltimore educators, Mary Alice Thomas and Quentin Wyatt. I am excited to welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, Gabrielle Wyatt. Hi, Gabrielle.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. If we just want to start it with what we call our School and Life segment. And so that's going to be a bit about your education and background and how you founded the Highland Project.
Great. So I founded the Highland Project out of wanting to live into something my parents taught my sisters and I from the moment we were born, which is that Black women and girls are brilliant. I grew up in a household of educators. My parents met teaching back home and home for me is Baltimore. And they went on to have 3 girls. I'm the youngest of 3. And I grew up watching my 2 sisters lean into their vocational calling of becoming educators as well. And every step of the way, my parents taught us that we were brilliant. They told it to us multiple times. And they told it to us about our peers, about our mentors, about our family members. I had the privilege, and I say privilege because it's something that's not offered to all of us, of going to magnet school for my K-12 experience. I had the chance to go to a school where educators, just like my parents, believed in the brilliance of every kid in the building. And I share that because this desire of mine to ensure that our brilliance is actualized goes back to my parents and to my schooling experiences. When I was 17 at my art school, I was discovering a playwright named Bertolt Brecht. Brecht was a Holocaust survivor, and he created a type of theater that was meant to make you so uncomfortable that you'd get up in the middle of a show and perform a political act. And at the time that I was learning about Brecht, I was really beginning to internalize the differences in the privilege I had in attending the magnet school that I did versus where my father in particular was teaching at the time. He was teaching at Milford Mill Academy, right in the county. And Milford Mill, before integration, represented this just mecca, frankly, of Black talent and Black innovation. And then after integration, you saw the flight of Black talent to schools like the very one I was attending, and then decades of underinvestment and under consideration of the brilliance that is building persist. And just like Brecht, I was angry and I was uncomfortable. And with that, I decided to run for school board in Maryland. There's an appointed role for Baltimore County School Board as young as 17. And I put my hat in the ring for it, and I earned a seat. And I never looked back. I learned that where I wanted to spend my time, where I wanted to make my legacy, was in moving structural change so that our brilliance as Black women and Black communities was realized. So I spent the last decade in education, systems change, first starting here in New York City, which is where I live, during the last few years of Mayor Bloomberg's term, in pursuing and leading some of his most impactful and most controversial set of structural change in the education system. I went on to lead similar work in Newark, New Jersey, and then spent the last 5 or 6 years in national K-12 education philanthropy. And I landed there out of often being on the ground, pursuing structural change that was brought into communities by outsiders, that was funded by outsiders, and rarely seeing people who look like the two of us truly co-powering at decision-making tables and frankly leading with power. And I said to myself, if our brilliance is to be actualized, particularly against the backdrop of all things 2020, we can't keep waiting on others to create it for us. We have to do it ourselves. And that led me, the key driver, to create what we now call the Highland Project.
Okay. Wow. So first of all, claps for your story. Running at 17 is something that makes my little political nerd heart flutter. I truly appreciate that. That's fantastic. But yeah, so tell us about the Highland Project now.
Sure. So the Highland Project, we are building and sustaining a pipeline of Black women leaders of systems change in communities, systems, and institutions, ultimately pursuing multi-generational wealth and opportunity in their communities. For us, we believe that we are powerful as Black women, that we have been the key drivers of social progress. We've been the key drivers of impact in America. We know, you know this very well, Lauren, right? That we drive political power in our communities, and frankly, often in national elections, that we drive economic power. And we drive intellectual power. We are some of the most degreed people in this nation. And yet we're also the most saddled by debt. And yet we're also the most excluded in the policies that electeds are writing, that we put them in the seat for to override or create a different path. And so at the Highland Project, our goal is that we not only see more women in seats of power across sectors that are key drivers in the creation of wealth, but that we are sustaining them, The pandemic highlighted the unsustainable power structure that exists for Black women leaders to be successful, not only for themselves, but for their communities, right? We saw in the ed sector, as an example, Black women superintendents stepping down, right, after their first or second COVID year. And that is not to connote that they did not do a good enough job or that they did not deserve rest. The problem is that we don't have a tap in and tap out strategy, right? That we don't have a culture where you can tap out to rest and to think about the next innovation that you will bring into the world. And so at the Highland Project, I think what's important to know about us is that we are more than a pipeline program. We are about sustaining Black women leaders and building then a movement around what does it mean to truly pursue sustainable structural change. Our heart and soul is that every year we are curating a cohort of 15 Black women across the nation, across sectors, and across generations, who not only work together over an 18-month period on what does sustainability really mean as Black women leaders, what does wealth really mean, but also what is our collective power right? And how do we put that into action? We also invest $100,000 in each leader's brilliance. I hope that one of our legacies as an organization is that we have truly created the MacArthur Genius Award for Black women. And so these
Mm.
grants are the first step in doing that. And then I'd say the final piece to know about Highland is that we really seek to transform this notion of what is wealth. And wealth for us is more than dollars in pocket. Wealth is about thriving. And I'm excited to talk a little bit more about how we've begun to unpack that definition and redefine it in our first year.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, so much of what you said was so rich. But I really would like to, as we transition into Hold Up, like talk about some of the words that y'all are redefining, which is bold. I mean, I want to start with wealth and particularly generational wealth and how you all define that.
Sure. So I first, going back to my deep educational roots, I often said as I chose that first career in educational justice, that I was doing it so that we had multi-generational opportunity, right? And that often education was thought of, still is, as the key to achieving opportunity. But when you take a step back, right, and look at it, for many, they're sizing up the costs of college tuition, the debt that is accumulating. And that is a key barrier to creating opportunity, right? Being saddled by debt prevents opportunity.
Absolutely.
And so in my time thinking about what we now call the Highland Project, I really grappled with this notion that creating opportunity is not rooted in just one solution or one sector.
Okay.
That then led me to this perhaps intellectual exercise of what is at the heart of opportunity as we know it today, and that's wealth. But wealth is not about dollars in pocket, because I think we all can name several people who we see in the media who we would deem as traditionally wealthy, but very unhappy.
Absolutely.
And for me, as I thought about what does it mean to create access, what does it mean to create opportunity, we have to first unpack what does wealth really mean, and that it's not enough to think about the path to increasing wages to honor our labor, which is necessary work, right? It's not enough to think about increasing the number of Black-owned businesses, which is an important part of the problem, but it's not enough. If Gabrielle is still that one student in her neighborhood who had the privilege to access a great school, it's not enough if Gabrielle does not have access to a healthcare system that believes her when she says her body is aching. It's not enough if when Gabrielle walks outside of her door, she is afraid to see a police officer and wondering, will she be there to realize the wages that she's earning? And so I share that journey as how I've really manifested to this point of we need a new definition of generational wealth, because it is not about dollars. It is about the ability to have freedom, to access opportunities not only in our lifetimes, but to see those opportunities when we're ancestors being accessed by our daughters and our daughters' daughters.
Woo! Okay. First of all, thank you for your thoughtfulness on that. And for your redefining. I do think it is so telling that for so many, I think I acknowledge this is like a point to even get to, because for so many, like in the event you're striving to earn more income, like that can definitely feel like wealth is dollars because dollars is freedom because I need. But there's something to understanding wealth as a conduit. And that's what I think you're tapping into, right? So like in so many spaces, wealth is tied to peace, it's tied to freedom, it's tied to security. And often for the Black experience, that is not just dollars, it's all of the things that you're tapping into. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I completely agree. And I would just say that over 700 Black women across the country agree with us. We had this idea, right, that birthed Highland that we're talking about. And then we said, like, let's let's ask Black women, do they agree, right?
Mhm.
How do they define this themselves? And so last summer, we went into the field with Cornell Belcher, and
Mhm.
we polled over 700 Black women to ask the very question of, what does wealth mean to you? What are your values around it? What are the top barriers? And um, we learned that we weren't alone in that, in
Mm.
this thinking of, yes, money is important, right? Like, we're not kidding ourselves in that.
Right.
But we learned and heard loud and clear that wealth for Black women was about thriving, which was defined by being able to pursue their educational goals, being
Mm.
able to have access to nutritious foods, to have loving and caring relationships with their family and friends, to not be saddled by debt, to be economically independent. And we found across the board that salaries did not have to be considered high for women
Mm.
to feel successful. That
Right.
it really was about these other factors, right? Of happiness, quite frankly, that were circling this word of wealth.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so in this initial cohort of leaders, do you
Mhm.
have like various people who are attempting to make, I guess, amends in those spaces for Black women or the country at large?
Yeah. I am so excited to kick off with our inaugural cohort officially in just 2 weeks. We'll all meet together for the first time. And I'm especially proud because not only is it a group that spans the nation, but it's one that's truly intergenerational. We have 4 generations of Black women leadership represented.
Mm.
We have leaders who are pursuing structural change in democracy. We have leaders who are pursuing structural change in healthcare, in criminal justice, which always sounds strange to me to put those 2 words together, given the current state of
Mhm.
that system for us as Black Americans. We have leaders who are asking, what does it mean to democratize access to mental health services for Black women? And so I think what's unique about this group, and what I would say will be unique about all cohorts, is not only leaders are solving for this definition of wealth from different seats of power or different sectors, but they're also inherently interdisciplinary themselves.
Mm.
They're asking the question of, what are the ways in which I create a legacy of multi-generational wealth, not only through an elected office seat, as an example, but through launching a podcast like yours, Lauren, right?
Mhm.
Because we know that narrative is important. We know that the passing of oral history is important. We
Mhm.
know the role that media plays in shaping the written and unwritten rules of wealth. And so I think what you'll see in this cohort, as the world gets to know them and as you see them continue to innovate and harness their power, is that they're pursuing interdisciplinary approaches, just like our ancestors did to get us there.
Mm. Absolutely. And as you've pursued this, has there been any critique about, I guess, like concern that even the notion of redefining generational wealth is overwhelmingly, rooted in capitalism. We should be trying to dismantle and like that. Has you gotten any pushback in spaces?
I'd say first, the notion of redefining wealth has been a journey, and I think
Mhm.
particularly for funders,
Okay.
right? Like when we typically, I feel like everywhere you look right now, people are talking about the racial wealth gap,
Yeah.
and I'll just say, like, the racial wealth gap will not be solved for unless we all put our money into a
Mhm.
pot and divvy it out. That's not going to happen, right? And so, and I mean, someone tell me I'm wrong, a listener. I don't think that's
Understood.
gonna happen.
Yeah.
And so I think that we've had to do a lot of educating with
Mhm.
funders on that point, and why there needs to be a different definition for wealth, and one that is rooted in structural change, not individual behavioral change. So I would
Okay.
say that is piece one. I think two, um, on this like question of, are we just participating in a vicious cycle of American capitalism? I have not heard that, but if that is someone listening wondering that, I would say we're working within the system that we're given,
Yeah.
and it's unfair that it's expected that Black women have to tear that system down. We continue to see that be an expectation of Black women. I think about our past election, that we were expected to deliver what was defined as a win, to save and solve problems when our basic needs aren't even being met.
Well,
And so that's what I would say to that critic. And I would also say that if a leader wanted to tear down a system or dismantle that system, we're there to support them. And because in movement building, right, and pursuing change, you don't just need people who had a career like I did in working within a system, right? We need the people outside
right.
imagining and building what that different world looks like. But in my opinion, you need both. And I think any Highland leader, right, they will say to you, like, I fall at this end, or somewhere in the middle. That's why they're with us, because we can't just build another world without still addressing the very structures that will prohibit that world from sustaining, right, from being here for future generations.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So in my work, we call that an inside-outside strategy, where you definitely need both. And I do think that it's always a tension, I think, when you want to do something that creates structural change but also acknowledge the system that we have. And so I fully acknowledge that, like, particularly revolutionaries and radicals and ideologues, like, desire to push us. And I think that's important, because that is why they're there, to expand, to think about the imagination. But I also think it's just as important to acknowledge, like, the reality of the circumstances that we have and what that means. And I mean, it's interesting. I think earlier you referenced that, like, the other ways, as far as, like, dealing with the economy, I'm thinking about Black-owned businesses and, the wage gap along with the wealth gap that we've talked about as a society, being something that contributes to the system. And yes, but also, like, there's just so many more barriers. I thought about, so there's COO of Starbucks at the time, I believe, Rosalind Brewer, was talking about, I believe it was in 2020, where two young Black men came into Starbucks and, had the police called on them. I don't remember the exact protocol, but she at that point was the highest ranking Black woman at Starbucks. I believe was third in command to the entire national chain. And she was saying, I have a son at that same age. And, like, I run this company, and, like, I still think about, like, his interactions in the day-to-day life. And so I think acknowledging that you have to have an inside in, outside strategy is a solid portion of making change. And I do agree that people should just get in line with the one they like best. Like, I don't think no one's the enemy here, other than, oppression. So I think that makes a lot of sense. As we transition into I Ain't Sorry, I'm wondering if there is a personal or professional philosophy that helps you do the work that you do.
I would say two, which both have been works in progress. So I'll just, like, caveat it with it, but it really led to Highland. And the first is, I'm not sorry for exploring my own definition and practices around what rest. And rest is what saved me and awakened me in 2020. I work with a woman named Octavia Rahim, who is based out of Atlanta. She has a virtual studio called Starshine and Clay. She is I call her our chief daydreaming officer at the Highland Project. But her goal is to create well-rested Black women who are pursuing social change or social impact, but are well-rested. And I started working with her in 2020, feeling like I had lost this fire in my belly on my legacy, and feeling like I wasn't really sure who I was as a leader, and how I wanted to leave this world. And, I had seen some of her stuff on Instagram somehow, and I decided to take a virtual class one day. And I'll never forget it. I showed up, I love fitness wear because I live in New York. We love boutique fitness. I'm, like, in my matching, like, sports bra, jacket, leggings, my yoga mat. And we get on and she just says, I just want you to look at all the women across the screen. And it was probably 60 something women from across America. And just sit there and rest and look at each other. Take that pause, look at yourself. And I remember Lauren being just brought to tears because that was a moment of rest. Your eyes were open, right? But it was a moment of taking a pause to hear yourself, to see yourself, and to see others.
Wow.
And I never looked back. Just like that school board day, it was like I never looked back from that day to say, I need to understand my relationship to rest and why I don't honor a path to figuring out what it means and how I practice it. And it, rest is what hands down created the Highland Project. There was another retreat with Octavia virtually that the name Highland Project came to me. Highland Project was named after my dad, who was passed away about 10 years ago. And he loved Highland Beach in Maryland, which was one of the first Black enclaves created by Frederick Douglass and his son, right? And it was a place of multi-generational wealth and opportunity. It was a place for community. It was a place for healing. And so I know the power of rest, what it means for how I'm able to stay here present for myself, for my family, for my team. But it also is key. It's the key to my creativity. And it's the key to how I think about my impact. The second thing I would say that I'm not sorry about is I'm not sorry that I refuse to sit in a scarcity mindset anymore. And that has been a really big transition for me as someone who always thinks about herself as like a pragmatic leader, particularly in like growing up in bureaucracies, right? Like you just had the choice to be pragmatic with limited resources in particular. And as I think about Highland, everything we do, not to circle around what I think has now become a very trendy word, but we sit with abundance. And many would have said, continue to say, and said at the time that there would not be money, there isn't money out there to invest in Black women in the way you're asking us to, Gabrielle. And we're about to hit our 1-year public launch mark. And so far we've raised $4.6 million. And while that is not the same amount of money that my white male peer has raised, it is more than most have raised, right?
Yeah.
And I see this vision of abundance and the responsibility to push funders and the community to really step outside of thinking that we have to stay in the in-between. That we have to stay in this place of pragmatism, that we have to operate in a space that there can only be one MacArthur Genius Award, right? That there can only be one Black-led nonprofit in this space,
Right.
that we can actually operate in abundance. That's something that I'm not sorry about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, both of those are fantastic. I do think that I haven't. Again, I don't know if it's a pragmatic thing, but the notion of scarcity is so prevalent in our society at large. I think the idea of not having enough, being under-resourced, can become like almost a level that you don't even realize you're operating in it. And so I think choosing to lean into abundance does something for your personal energy around things like finances, and also like understanding. Even I think it allows you to like network better with your peers. Because I mean, I can feel like across my life and career, between jobs and education opportunities, like the nastiest spaces I've been in have been when others' success feels like a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
And overall, that's rooted in scarcity. And so to be in a space where it's like, there's enough for all of us. When you win, I'm excited for you. That means my win is coming. Maybe we can help me win. But it's not a situation where your being successful is an immediate detriment to me.
That's right. And we're so cultured, particularly as Black women, right? Because there has always only been one of us.
Yeah.
Right. We are conditioned to first treat each other with scarcity.
Yeah, to view one another as competition. Absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, the cohort you're bringing together sounds dynamic. I'm excited to see all the work that you do. And I'm glad that y'all are getting a chance to meet in person because of everything going on in the world. I hope that's the general trajectory everything stays on. But in the interest of continuing our conversation, I'm curious to know if there is anything you have learned about yourself or about your field in this process.
I've learned so much. I was like, we're only a year in, and
Yeah.
it feels like we could already write our first book. Hmm. I think something I learned is I didn't fully appreciate, and this might sound odd to say that, in founding this organization, I didn't fully appreciate how rare what we're building is.
Mm.
Um, and more specifically, the space to access an interdisciplinary and intergenerational
Mm.
community, and a space to access experiences that truly are created for us and by us. Often, I was part of programs that really did fill my cup, but they also were created within white-led institutions. And so, in those examples, I was taught a certain way of learning, right, and exploration of my own leadership, of my own power. And what has been beautiful to watch and to see, particularly with my team, is that we can challenge. We don't have to learn in that way.
Mm.
We don't have to learn in the way that spaces were curated for us before in. And that has really stepping into that, which at times is hard, right? If you've
Mhm.
only known one thing for so long. I'm incredibly proud that we constantly challenge ourselves as a team. Are we learning in this way because that's what we have only known?
Mm.
Or are we choosing to do that ourselves? Are we choosing
Yeah.
to learn this way because we think it will um, tap in to a new epiphany, right? Or a new idea? I would say the second thing I'm learning is that we don't have to carry as Black women white guilt and
Mm.
and I'm seeking to lean into that in this next phase of growth. But I think we've oft as we create the space for and by us where we can show up authentically. Um, I've learned personally, like I have to reckon with when I didn't show up authentically and what
Mm.
contributed to what I think of as like the shell of Gabrielle, right? And often for me, that was rooted in feeling I needed to carry white
Mm.
comfort, right? And I think what I'm learning is that's not mine to carry. And that's not ours to carry as Black women. And so I'm learning, what does it mean to not carry that
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah. I definitely see that. I mean, everything from one, so much of the world is rooted in white comfort. And so to not carry it does often in like, it's heavy and then you realize how many other people are also carrying it. And so I fully appreciate your work in that area as well. Gabrielle, I have enjoyed you immensely today. This conversation has been so rich and so life-giving, and I really do appreciate your time. Did you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to leave people with?
Mhm. Invest in Black women, invest in Black women, invest in Black women.
Amen, 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 and ashe. In the event people want to keep up with you, what's the best way that they do that?
Sure. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Lead Highland. That's at Lead Highland. You can also join us on our website, which is www.thehighlandproject.org.
Okay, well, thank you for your time today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. If you're looking for me, you can find me at Lauren Zayu on Twitter and Instagram. And if you're looking for the show, you can find us at unbossed, unbothered, and unfiltered.com. Thank you.